Hello everyone. The topic that I would like to discuss with you today is about Pope John Paul or Saint John Paul II and the fall of communism. So what we are going to discover here is the role of Saint John Paul in the collapse, particularly of the communist government in Poland. As an introduction, Saint John Paul II should definitely be credited with helping bring about the demise of the Soviet Union. So we will there are those people who really affirm that Saint John Paul's uh, help and his inspiration to really fight for what is the right of human freedom, particularly religious freedom, really brought the communist into its fall, no? So leaving aside the dimension of politics, economics, and military power, Pope John Paul II evidenced the hands of God, no, the hand of God at work throughout this scenario, no, how communists, particularly the entire Eastern Europe, where it becomes the communist uh, government, no. For him, he knew and believed he was simply the instrument of the Lord who preached the truth and bore witness to the power of faith. So I want to present to you how the people in Poland were inspired by his teaching in order to really overthrow the communist government in their country. But before we will talk about uh, the role of Saint John Paul, let us first have some understanding of what communism is all about. No, it is the theory is developed by this philosopher in the picture that you have seen, no? German philosopher Karl Marx. No, so what is communism? Communism is a system of social organization in which all economic and social activity is controlled by a totalitarian state dominated by a single and self-perpetuating political party. So there was this core group, and in this kind of system, since this is a system, the economy and the social activity is controlled by this group, no? And this kind of ideology is trying to abolish what Karl Marx also believed, no? That according to Karl Marx, since he's the one who developed this theory, that inequality and suffering is a result from capat cap capitalism, sorry, no? So under capitalism, private business people and corporations own all the factories, equipments, and other resources, and it's called the means of productions. And these owners, according to communist doctrine, can exploit workers who are forced to sell their labor for wages. So in a communist government, private property is abolished, okay, and it becomes classless. So there is no poor, no rich, no, there is no class at all, okay. Everyone should work according to its capacity, but they are provided with the needs accordingly, no. So in order that these things would happen according to Karl Marx, it would be bloody, no? Like the communist state, that capitalist economic and political system must be completely overthrown through revolution, but it must be bloody. And this is what really happened in Poland, no? Where they are being dominated by a communist government. Okay, so what did Saint John Paul II uh, contribute to the overthrow of the communist government? So back in Poland, when Karol was still a bishop, he already, confronted the communist government because of the widespread abuses on human violations committed by this communist regime. No, having a deep faith and deep concern for the dignity of every human person, and this is really what he is fighting for, no? The need to respect human rights, no? So he is totally against communism. For him, it's really evil, no? A religion where it is founded on man and no place on the faith of God, no? So he fought this battle in three distinct fronts. No, first his ministry to young people, so were still young priests. No, he started to already have these open theological discussions about particularly the dignity of human person, no, and the evils brought about by communist regime. Second, his struggles to obtain permission from the communist government in Poland to allow the constructions of new churches, no. Very famous construction was the construction of church in Nova Hota, no. Of course, they have to ask permission from the government. The government took them many years and for asking permissions from the government, no, the church to have this construction. There was this incident where Saint John Paul II uh, erected a big cross and celebrate a midnight mass in the area of Nova Hota, and then the communist government again removed this cross, this big cross, no. And according to Carol, if they removed it, then we will erect it, stand it again the next year, no, and we will celebrate mass there, no. It's really his desire to have a church there, no. And lastly, his insistence to have annual procession on the streets, which was blocked by communist government, no. So these are the confrontations that he had experienced back when he was still a bishop, and I think the hand of God, no, is really working, no, in the life of Saint John Paul II. So why did Saint John Paul oppose communism, no? Saint John Paul II opposed this totalitarian because of his idea of God-given human rights, no. It grew out of his devotion to the idea of God-given human rights, no. What is this human rights, no? This is particularly on the religious freedom, the freedom to worship, no. Expressed his position about Saint John Paul expressed his position that about the curtailment of religious freedom in the communist regime, no. According to him, the curtailment of religious freedom of individuals and communities is not only a painful experience, excuse me, but is above all an attack on man's very dignity, no? It is a radical injustice with regard to what is particularly deep in man, what is authentically human. It is therefore difficult to accept a position that gives only atheism the right of citizenship in public and social life, while believers are barely tolerated or are even entirely deprived of the rights of citizenship, no? Imagine during when you were still in studying, no, where the seminaries are they banned from ordination. Imagine that scenario, or they are only allowed to have a celebration of the mass twice a week, no, when they are used to celebrate mass almost every day, no. The priest celebrates mass every day, and then the government do not want to happen it. So that's why Saint John Paul II did not really accept the ideology brought by communism. Now, I think the hand of God is on the, as I have said, on the side of Saint John Paul II, because he was elected as Pope, no. So what was the impact of Saint John Paul II's election to papacy, no? The new Pope kept open the channels of dialogue while pressing communist regime to comply with international agreements on human rights, because when Karol Wojtyła became Pope, he somehow uh, tried to modify Pope Paul VI's policy of Ostpolitik, no? So the Vatican sought to foster better relations with Soviet bloc countries, no, in the hope of improving conditions for Catholic churches there, no, not just in Poland but in other countries in Eastern Europe under the communist regime, no. In June 1979, no, less than 9 months after becoming Pope, Saint John Paul allowed to visit his native land, no. So it took some months to ask permission from the government, no. So where he spoke to crowds totaling 13 million and publicly called for political self-determination for Poland's citizens and formation of its own culture and civilization. No? And after that visit in 1979, the next year, nationwide strikes forced the Polish government to raise wages, loosen censorship, and permit the formation of an independent labor union. That's why it born this so-called solidarity movement. So in a communist government, the formation of union is not allowed, no? And everything, no? Whatever that the church published, no? In books or in radio or mass media is censored by the government because that's they have the total control of the activity of the people, no? So that's what happened. Saint John Paul II was a major inspiration for this non-violent movement, no? This so-called solidarity movement. So over the following years, the Pope continued to encourage the democracy movement with weekly radio address in Polish, no? So he started to always express, no, his thoughts about religious freedom and allowing the communist government to allow people to create their own political system, no, without the dictates of an ideology that has as that the faith in God has no place, no. The direction of church is not really favorable on this side, no. So that's the impact of Saint John Paul's election to the papacy. Okay, so when he was elected, the communists are really surprised, no. So in a reeling from the shock, no, Yuri Andropov, he is the head of the KGB stands for Russian terms, no. So, but it is in English the Soviet Union Secret Police and Intelligence Agency. Telephoned the KGB chief in Warsaw, no, in Poland, and asked in pained amazement, "How could you possibly allow the election of a citizen of a socialist country as pope?" And in response, the chief told Andropov that he should direct his question to officials in Rome rather than in Warsaw, Poland, because they are the ones who elect the pope. So the Soviets opposed. As I have already told you that he wanted to visit his homeland. No, Pope John Paul was asked which country he would want first to visit, and he said his own country, no, his homeland. No, so from the outset, from the beginning, the Kremlin had vetoed the idea of its puppets in the Polish regime allowing their most famous citizen to enter his own country. So they are referring to Saint John Paul II. No? Poland's puppet-in-chief Communist Party boss Edward Gierek. No? So Edward Gierek gently informed his Kremlin string puller that stopping such a visit was impossible. No? How could I, according to Edward Gierek, how could I not receive a Polish pope? And he pleaded with Soviet General Secretary Leonid Brezhnev, when the majority of my countrymen are Catholics, no? So 99% of the populations in Poland are Catholics, no? And Brezhnev reluctantly gave his consent, warning Gierek, "Well, do what you want, so long as you and your party don't regret it later." And he slammed down the telephone. So of course Gierek would regret it, as would Brezhnev, no? So they even said, how can I refuse the Pope? And Brezhnev suggested, you tell the Pope that he is sick, no? That's the very simple excuse, but it is not really acceptable, no? Now, it was really a joyous part that Saint John Paul II able to visit his homeland in June 2, 1979, no? Shortly after 10 a.m. on Saturday. That was Saturday, June 2, 1979. The Pontiff arrived home, no? And as you can see in the picture, that was really the real scenario, no? One of the pictures that on that day when Saint John Paul II arrived in his hometown, no? Uh, it was a touching moment with tens of millions of every Polish, no, with masses, homilies, and speeches and statements, no. Of this, none surpassed the Holy Father's homily at his opening mass on June 2. No? It was a homily given appropriately at Warsaw's Victory Square. So this area, it's like here in the Philippines, it's like uh, the Luneta Park, no? It was a square renowned as a symbol of withstanding World War II totalitarianism, and it was now with St. John Paul's presence a symbol of withstanding Cold War totalitarianism. No? So throughout this 9 day of pilgrimage, a kind of walking novena, no? Wherever the Pope went, even in when he visited his own parents, no, in the cemetery, people would come to him, no. So throughout this 9 day pilgrimage, it's a kind of walking novena. Saint John Paul avoided being too explicitly political, but when the Polish Pope, who had suffered under this Marxism, Leninism, invoked the Polish witness and experienced, every Pole knew to connect his words the struggle against atheistic communist ideology that was an omnipresent evil every day of their lives, no. So he expressed, no, maybe subtle the evils of communism, no. And then came the significant statement, no, the Pope's strongest political affirmation of the entire 9 days, marked with an exclamation that says there can be no just Europe without the independence of Poland marked on its map. So it really uh, made the people really fight for what is right, no, and they were able to create this union, no, solidarity movement, and it is that wanted to have a reform in the communist government. So luckily, this solidarity movement was really successful, no. It undergoes a very difficult uh, experience, but they were successful, no. In the picture you said the leader of this solidarity movement is Lech Walesa, no. So the end of communism in Poland, the revolutions of 1989 formed part of a revolution wave in the late 1980s. So 1970, St. John Paul was in Poland in 1979. In 1980s, that was the start of that revolutions, no, inspired by the words live when he visit in Poland, no. Early in 1990s, that resulted in the end of communist rule throughout the world, including in Central and Eastern Europe and beyond, no. So there was this some kind of a domino effect on what was going on in Poland, no. The reform movement that ended communism in East Central Europe began in Poland, no. So it was really in Poland, no. This solidarity movement, an anti-communist trade union and social movement, forced Poland's communist government to recognize it in 1980 through a wave of strikes that gained international attention. So on June 4, 1989, the trade union Solidarity won an overwhelming victory in a partially free elections in Poland. So when that elections happened, that was the end of communism. So with that free elections in Poland leading to the peaceful fall of communism in that country in the summer of 1989. So there are really many people who really affirm, no, in the certified course pack, it was really a credited to what Saint John Paul, no. But Saint John Paul said that I didn't really cause this to happen, but he would just simply humbly say that that tree was already rotten. I just gave it a good shake, and the rotten apples fell, no. It was just like a tree, no. So the communists has indeed sowed some bitter seeds that produced a shaky tree with rancid fruits, no. This was a tree with bad roots. The tree fell, so did the wall, no, referring to the Berlin Wall, no. And no one would deny that Saint John Paul, no, despite his own pleas of humility, deserves great credit for his role in providing a powerful push, no? And it was the end of communism in Poland and also in Eastern Europe, where other countries also suffer from the I'd say unjust treatment, because particularly the exercise of worship has not been respected, meaning religious freedom. Okay, so for our reflection in this experience of the Pope leading to the overthrow of the communist regime, we are reminded to settle conflict in a peaceful way. You know, a revolution must be a non-violent revolution. So we will continue to strive a perfect community in your family, at work, at school. No? Having Christ in the midst will become an inspiration to others. So that's all for my discussion about this topic. If you have questions or clarifications, feel free to message me. Thank you for listening.